Hi folks, my name's Tom Johnson-Medland and I'm here today to share with you an in-service entitled Giving Voice. It's very important to the therapeutic process of growth and of healing to go through what we know as the way of giving voice, allowing things that are within us to come out of us so that we can really, in a sense, look at them, process them, and help ourselves grow by using those things that come out of us. And this idea actually has always been a part of therapeutic intervention in life, whether it's from classical times and in philosophy or in medicine, or even in what would have then been considered psychology, or contemporary times. The idea of allowing things to come out of us and be able to use that as material towards our own health and healing, it's very, very central. There's a wonderful passage in what's known as the Nag Hammadi Gospel of Thomas that says, if you allow those things that are within you to come out, they will save you. But if you do not allow the things that are within you to come out, then those very things could destroy you. So we want to talk about the things that can arise, can come out of us during this time of grieving and loss. And we want to learn how to give voice to the feelings of mourning and grief so that we can grow. So the first thing I want you to do is look at the handouts that you have either been given, if this is being shown in a facility, or if you're seeing this online, there's two attachments. One are the handouts, and then the other is an article that I wrote that basically is about the process we're going to talk about. But on this first sheet, you'll see that it says, grief work, what are these aggregates about? And it lists the heart, the mind, the soul, and the body across the top. You know, one of the things that's so important about the culture that we live in is that we're made up of many, many subcultures. People have come from all over the world to form this great American experiment. One of the areas, though, that I think if we do not become conscious of, that could really be detrimental in our ability to communicate with each other, is we all have understanding of what it means to be human that's based on our cultures. And if we don't talk about them and talk about them in terms that are common, then we can forget how just very, very similar we are, and that some of the discrepancies or differences between people are very minute and minuscule, but that we are all pretty much built of the same kinds of blocks. We may call them different things, and that's, I think, what's important to discuss. But so I think any of our subcultures in the American scene would agree that we have a mind, we have a heart or an emotional center, we have a body, and I think we can all agree that we have a soul. And I'm not talking about a religious identity so much. I think the religious identity we would probably want to term spirit, and that's going to be something that you'll want to deal with your religious leader, your spiritual director, your priest, your parish priest, your pastor, your rabbi, your imam, or whoever it is that leads your religious congregation. And that will differ based on religious practice. But instead, I want to talk about a soul, which is really a deeper set of feelings than just superficial feeling, or some rudimentary feelings that we may have in the heart, or rudimentary emotions that we represent in the heart. There may be some deeper ones, and there are, that we'll represent. We'll call that the soul, and we'll talk a little bit about what they are in a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list of what each of these things does, or how it operates or is about in our life. So let me help you by starting off the list. When I'm done, I'm going to pause for a little bit and ask you to fill in the list the rest of the way yourself with things that you think are common examples. So when we say the mind, we're talking about what? Well, I think the mind, and you can start listing these things out now. I think the mind thinks. I think the mind remembers. It catalogs. It lists. It chooses. It determines. It sequences things. It puts them in order. It organizes things. It places them how they need to be to function. So these are all functions of what the mind does. So what other things do you think the mind does? You're going to list them out when we pause. The heart. Well, the heart loves. The heart may be jealous. The heart may be joyful. The heart may be happy. The heart may be stymied or confused. The heart may long or desire for something, it feels. So what are those other feelings that you see every day in your life? List them under the heart. Under the soul. The soul is really the part in our life that hopes or dreams, it desires, it wants to be a part of, it likes to create. So community is a part of the soul. Hoping, dreaming, creating is part of the soul. I think music is a part of the soul, because music is about connecting. Think about when you get done a rough day at work and you hop out in your car and you turn on your radio really loud and you blast that music. That is a deeper feeling that you're plugged into. That's a soulful feeling. Or being in a group of people that all have the same aim or wishes and you feel like you belong. That's an emotion, feeling of belonging, but it's deeper than that. So what are these other deeper areas? Hoping, dreaming, creating, belonging. I think, again, music would be a really good thing to put in there. I think your hobbies, you like to write, you like to dance, you like to speak, you like to be compassionate. Um, those are all soulful things too. And I think actually too, a soulful thing is forgiving. I think hate is a soulful thing. I think it's deeper. Forgiveness and hate, they're deeper than just an emotion. I think they are much larger, and it's those larger things that are soulful. So you can add those things. The body, what does the body do? Well, the body feels, the body eats, it sleeps, it procreates, it dances, it exercises, it walks, it cries, it laughs, it hugs, it shakes hands. Let's list out all those things. Okay? So take some time, take a few minutes to fill in other things that the body, the mind, the heart, and the soul do. Okay, thank you. So now I'd like to move to the next sheet that's in the packet, and it says, how do these aggregates grieve? So we've put together a list of what this aggregate does in our life on a normal basis. What happens when you lose somebody? And let's start with a general story. So you've been with your loved one or friend for several days. The family's gathered around, all the friends are gathered around. You're in a home or you're in a facility somewhere. You've been in and out of feelings of grandeur. Somehow being around the deathbed somehow feels different or more elevated than other parts of life. It feels a little weird and awkward sometimes. Sometimes it's very intimate, sometimes it's not. And then the person dies. So you've got all this jumble of feeling going on, and then the death actually occurs. What usually happens next is you feel this massive shift. You've moved out of that pre-death specialness, and now you're like, uh-oh, we've got to do something. So generally what happens is people start calling the funeral home, or they start writing out what they have to do, or somebody will go grab clothes that they want the person to be buried in. And I mean, if there's a large group of people, you'll find out that everybody does kind of their own thing. But one of the most central things that happens is somebody says, let's get lunch, let's get breakfast, let's get dinner. So they say, Joe, we want you to go out, get coffee, get food. And they start to tell him or her, or whoever it is, what it is you want. And then Joe goes out and gets outside to the parking lot or the street, and all of a sudden forgets why he's out there, forgets his keys, forgets what everybody ordered, or where he put the note. That sense of loss and confusion is common across the boards for people, and it's a great equalizing event that we can all plug into. So let's just look at this particular example as an image of what happens when we lose somebody. Somehow everything in our life has just changed, and we will feel lost and confused and a jumble and unable to find any sense of normalcy in the things that are about to take place in our future. It's almost as if our life feels, our heart feels, our mind feels swollen and unusual, that we can't function like we normally do. We are lost. That experience of losing somebody places us in a feeling of being lost. And when we're in that feeling of being lost, it's very, very hard to navigate and feel as if everything is okay. So what we're going to talk about now is what happens in those aggregates. How do they grieve? What kinds of things happen so that we can get an understanding? We're going to pause again so you can fill in your list, and then after that we're going to talk about a simple model of being able to give voice, that will help you cope with how things have changed in your life because of the loss. Okay? So we've already developed our list that says this is what our aggregates of our life deal with on a routine and regular basis. Now let's build the list that says this is what happens to them when we've lost somebody. So for the mind forgets. I mean, think of that example of Joe. It loses things. He couldn't find his keys. He couldn't find the lists he made. He couldn't remember where he was going or what he was doing. The mind can't organize. It cannot focus at all. It cannot feel, it cannot think of ways to do things that it might have done yesterday. So it's all about that swollenness or that sense of loss that goes on in the mind is all about forgetting how things normally function or not being able to find a way that it might traditionally have found for itself. And that's disconcerting. I mean, everybody, how many times have you lost your keys in life? It's not fun. Now, after a loss, you're going to experience more of that kind of activity. The loss may not just be the loss of keys. You may sit down at your desk and not remember how to run that program that you run every day. So again, you're going to list things that the mind is unable to do because it is grieving. Or things that happen in the mind when it does grieve, like it loses things, it forgets. So for the heart, what goes on in the heart when it's grieving? Well, it's sad. It feels alone. It's happy, then joyful, then jealous. It moves from emotion to emotion to emotion, not settled. And it feels very random. And many times it feels numb or lost or disconnected. So write down what the heart goes through when it's grieving. The soul, what does the soul feel when it's lost somebody it loves or is in a major loss in its life? Well, it feels abandoned, it feels disconnected, it feels isolated, it may sometimes feel as if it doesn't need anything. It may lose its will to do anything or to create. That kind of apathy is huge in the soul. For writers or dancers or musicians, that sense of apathy comes around that you don't want to do your craft. That thing that gives you soul fullness is no longer accessible to you. So think of those other things in your soul. You don't have any more hopes or dreams, or you feel like your hopes and dreams you had to do this, that, or the other thing in life, they're no longer attainable. And in the body, what's the body do when it's grieving? Well, it sleeps, or it doesn't sleep. It eats too much, or it doesn't eat at all. It may find an addiction. It may laugh or cry or weep. It may fall down to the ground and not get out of bed or up off of the floor. Those things happen to people in their bodies. What else? It's restless. It's agitated. So list all of those things that happen in the body. Okay, so we're going to take a couple minutes for you to go back again and say, what happens in your heart, mind, soul, and body when you grieve? And then when you're done, turn the video back on. Okay, thanks. Well, welcome back. So we know now how it is we function as a human. If we look at our anthropology of what it means to be a human, we know that we have a heart, we have a mind, we have a soul, we have a body, and that there are normal, everyday ways that those aggregates in our life function. We also know that when we've lost somebody or we're in a major experience of loss, that everything changes. We are shaken up, as it were. Our life may feel swollen and numb, and it feels completely different, and so each of those aggregates does what it does differently when it grieves. And we've shared a little bit about some of those experiences and what they are. Now what we want to do is we want to take a look at the sheet that has the 4 grids on it. And this is actually the Giving Voice worksheet. One of the things that we found to help get through the change, the randomness, and the confusion and upside downness of how our aggregates function during loss, one of the ways we can get through that is this process of giving voice. And what do we want to give voice to? Usually what helps us to give voice to are stories about the person we've loved or about our own lives and our connection to them. Because when we give voice to those things and we allow them to come out, they bring with them some other things. They bring with them our emotions. They bring with us our soulfulness, and they bring for us and to us a sense of what our bodies can do in order to get through this. So it's really a way, stories are really a way of addressing the reorganization or the reacclimation of your life during loss. That, telling stories isn't going to make you better. But what it's going to do is it's going to connect you to those parts of your life that bring health and healing over time. Because one of the things that we really feel when we've lost somebody or we're in a great experience of loss is we don't know what to do. So this is one thing that we know we can start to do that will move us through the process with some regularity. And one of the greatest things that we often, I would say almost always recommend to people is if you want to start telling stories, then bring out a photo album or get together a bunch of people who have memories of the person or the experience that you've just lost, because then you'll have a fuller context from which to tell tales. So what you'll see is it's divided into 4 boxes. It says mind stories, heart stories, soul stories, and body stories. And my encouragement is to think of one particular person, one particular loss that you've had in your life, and then to start there with that one particular person and come up with one particular memory first. The whole thing about having a photo album or a group of people around who can tell stories and how important that is. If you want to validate that as a very rich experience, just think back to any funeral or wake or graveside ceremony that you've been to. The event itself is very solemn, sometimes very awkward. There's that huge corporate feeling of not knowing what to do and feeling somehow abashed at yet another time when we're having to face death. You know what I'm talking about. It feels different than any other time in life when you're in those experiences. But we reclaim our sense of connectedness and homeostasis when we leave those events, and those events need to stay that way. I mean, it's a part and parcel of how we mend, but also how we socially acknowledge these changes that happen in death. But when you leave either the funeral, the wake, or the graveside, and you go back to the house or to the restaurant or to wherever it is that you're going to, a hall to have a meal together, the feeling shifts, and the feeling tends to shift at the point when somebody starts to tell stories or say something about the person you've lost. So for example, you get back to the house and there's always that one uncle who says, Bob was the biggest so-and-so, and I'll never forget the time that he, fill in the blank, and all of a sudden the feeling in the room goes, and people feel like they're back in themselves again, that they're connected to the person who were before the trauma of the loss or the elevated feelings of the celebration. They feel like they're themselves again for a little bit, and it's all because of story. Some of the stories will be sad, some will be happy, some will be hilarious, some of them will be a little poignant and pointed. But again, it puts things in context. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to move through this box. Think of a story about someone you love or someone you've lost and write it down. And then as you're writing that story down, that's your mind story. It's your memory. You move to this box, and that is your emotion or your heart story. How does that story make you feel? Write it down. Let's take, for example, the grandmother who decides to get up, pack the car with all the necessary items to go to a park and cook breakfast for her grandchildren and her children. So she goes to the house, gets the grandchildren and children, gets them all gathered into the car, tells them they've got everything, and they go to the park and cook breakfast impromptu one Saturday morning. They have a great experience. So let's say that's your grandmother. You tell that story. I remember the time when Grandma took us all to the park to cook breakfast. Well, how does that make you feel? That's what's going to go in that emotion or heart stories. And, you're going to say, like, well, it made me miss her now. or it made me really happy because we had a lot of times like that. Or I hated it. I couldn't stand it. She got me up at 9 o'clock on a Saturday when I wanted to sleep till 12. I mean, so your emotions that come off of the story, so you're bringing out that story, you're putting that down as a mind story, you're bringing out the heart story by sharing the emotion of how that story from the mind makes you feel. Then your soul story is, what does that say about you and your hopes and dreams? Well, a lot of times people's souls say things like, I want to be just like that person, and I want to capture those moments of spontaneity or innovation. So the soul story is, I want to emulate them. I want to belong to a community of people that does that. Or I want to learn to be able to do those same things. I want to be compassionate. So your soul story is going to wrap itself around something that you want to change or renew in your character that's going to be connected to that person. And this is all, I mean, these are the things that generally don't get talked about. I mean, almost everybody gets to a place where they start to tell stories. And then from that list of almost everybody, most of those people will at some point start to express how they feel about it. But a lot of what doesn't get talked about is how you feel this loss has impacted you and what you can do to get back to the person you long to be because of that person in your life. Does that make sense? Trying to get back to that direction that you think that your life has is in this soul area. And particularly with parents and grandparents and siblings, when those are the losses, there's a lot of soul work that needs to happen because we feel with those people and very, very close friends that we've lost a large part of ourself. And this is usually what we're talking about. I don't know how I'll be able to go to that place anymore because Bob never is going to be around to do it, or Alice is not going to be here to enjoy that with me. I don't know how I'm going to do that. These are soulful things and their connections. So how does your soul feel about the loss? What's the story it tells? And in the case of the grandmother, it may be, I want to do those same kind of random acts of kindness, and that may be the story right there. And then your body stories. What is your body doing because of that person or this loss? So how are you going to cope with, what's your story? What are you going to do in your body to acknowledge this story that you've told? So a lot of times why these stories are happening at a hall or a home around food is because we're finding something to do with our body. Another common thing that people do is they get together and they go for a walk and have these conversations then. Or they will do this exercise, with filling out these grids, and then they'll feel like what their body response is that they want to go out and they want to go for a run, or they want to just go for exercise and go for a walk or hit the treadmill. So your physical care, how you're going to deal with the laws on a physical basis, is going to be important. Some of it may just simply be, your physical care may be that you are going to gather with people on a weekly basis to do this process of sharing the story. So this is the grid. This is the giving voice grid. It's putting out on paper how your mind remembers, how your heart feels, how your soul is connected to, and what your body's going to do in order to process this grief and this loss. This sheet, I would recommend making multiple copies of this sheet and doing this exercise several times. Particularly if you're in a family, bring a couple of sheets and sit and write them down. Or don't write them down, just go through the process. Start telling stories, but make sure that somebody says, well, how's that make you feel when you hear that story? Or how does that connect to who you want to be? That's the soulful question. Or what can we do in order to give credence to everything that we've just shared? Another way of looking at that physical care and the body stories is sometimes people, after they gather to do this, maybe they all gather, and what their bodies do is they sit in a circle, in the living room, but maybe when they're done, they get up and they go and they plant a tree. So I think what's important and what I'm trying to stress through this sense of process is, you are much deeper than you know. You've got these 4 areas of your life, these 4 aggregates of the mind, the heart, the soul, and the body. each of them needs to somehow give voice to this loss that they've experienced, and it is a process that needs to be tended to. That although this can happen naturally, it doesn't work out the same as if you actively participate in bringing these things up and giving voice to them. We all know people who have never tried to process losses and how their lives change. Some people who don't try to process their losses become bitter or angry or isolated or stuck. And it is our belief that giving voice to your heart, your mind, your soul, and your body, in conjunction with the stories of the life of the loved one you've lost, or the experience or way of living that you've lost. Again, it could be a divorce, it could be loss of a job, but sharing stories around that loved one or that experienced loss will help move you from A to B, and do so in a very healthy and a routine, natural, and homeostatic fashion. So thank you for your time. If you are gathered together as a group, share ideas. Matter of fact, if you're gathered together in a group watching this, you should start to tell some stories of someone that you've lost recently in common. Or if you're at an in-service in a group, this is going to be a time for questions and answers, and the person who's facilitating this conversation with you would be glad to have those questions and answers now with you. So please take time to grieve your losses in a way that gives voice to everything that's going on inside of you, and recognize that you are a deeply complex person, and that healing and mending is equally as deep and complex. Thanks for watching.